Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is officially running against U.S. Senator John Cornyn next year. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, that and other developments in our regular Wednesday political roundup.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
We'll also discuss Governor Abbott's call for an 18th District special election in November and why he says he's waiting so long to fill that open seat. And we'll talk about Health Secretary RFK Jr.'s endorsement of the MMR vaccine amid a Texas flu outbreak and how that's going over with the anti-vaccine movement. Also this hour, one Houstonian's notable role in aviation history, and a play at Houston's Ensemble Theater captures life for young black women in the South who dream of playing pro basketball. We'll start with a news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Coming up this hour, a Houstonian's place in aviation history and what a play at Houston's Ensemble Theater has to say about growing up as a black woman in the South with dreams of playing pro basketball. But first, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has officially announced he will challenge U.S. Senator John Cornyn in next year's midterm elections. Each Wednesday, we seek context and clarity about political developments here in Houston, across Texas, and nationwide. And joining us to supply that in today's political roundup are party politics co-host Brandon Rottinghouse and his fellow University of Houston political science lecturer Nancy Sims. Brandon, Nancy, good morning.
Good morning, Craig.
Why is Ken Paxton challenging John Cornyn? Let's start there.
Well, the rumors had been circulating for months, so now it's official. Interestingly announced on a podcast, I believe, a radio show, not at a big rally with supporters. But
I am in favor of such announcements in the future.
Good, Craig. He announced, and I think people had been anticipating this, so it's going to be a very serious Republican primary for the U.S. Senate.
Why is he running?
I think partly it's about ideology. This will be a race that defines the Republican Party. It's establishment versus insurgent at the highest level. John Cornyn has been a political survivor while in office and has effectively held down the mantle of being a kind of establishment wing, traditional kind of country club Republican. He's one of the last few at that high level, and I think Ken Paxton wants to change that. So ideologically, there are lots of these divides, but at the end of the day, it's really about power. I think that the kind of right-leaning groups, these kind of insurgents in Texas, want to circle the wagons. They want to make sure they keep their power, and they're doing a pretty good job at the state level, and now they want to take some of that to D.C. I
would think we would characterize Ken Paxton as a political survivor as well, maybe fitting that definition more directly even than Cornyn.
I don't know. He certainly faced challenges.
Impeachment, for goodness sake.
But so has the president, right?
True.
I mean, I would say Ken Paxton sort of falls into the Trump category. He's had a lot of attacks on him, right? Versus him, he would say, I've been attacked because of my positions. And he's a Trump buddy, and we need to keep that in mind. I think, Craig, you and I were speaking about last year when he went to support Trump in his trial in New York, and that we had talked about that on the show. So I think he's very close to Trump, and I think Trump may intervene in the race.
If he does, then Trump will be the kingmaker. I am not 100% certain he'll back Paxton, but he very well could. It's possible that somebody like a Wesley Hunt jumps into this race, which would set up a kind of generational change for the U.S. Senate race. As it is now, the kind of way that the ideology and the battles have come out will be a pretty traditional one. It's going to be a very expensive race. But I think your point is really good, Craig, about Ken Paxton. He's like Platinum Paxton. He survived impeachment. He survived bar complaints. He survived investigations from the FBI and from DOJ. So,
and the SEC.
Yes. And so he has been able to maneuver around all of them. And at the core of it, and this is what's the important part, is that he's able to survive and to raise money from it. So there's a kind of fundraising aspect of this. And so when this week actually he was kind of hit with a whistleblower's settlement that was kind of a long time coming, more probably than he expected, he used that as a wedge, as a grudge to say, this is unfair. It's, kind of against these sort of principles. He went to blame Dade Phelan again for impeaching him. That's the kind of just rage. That's the kind of friction that he needs to raise money, and he's been pretty successful at it.
But I think the thing we have to remember is that primaries in Texas are a small percentage of voters that are the absolute most partisan. So in that case, you'd give Paxton a slight advantage because you're going to have your hardest core raging Republicans, Trump supporters, and Cornyn will have to fight for his life. Now, I do think Cornyn may have the money advantage.
It would seem, though, that this would certainly challenge the concept of this is not really insurgent versus establishment. They're both establishment. I mean, Ken Paxton's been in office and statewide office for years and years now.
Right. No, I think that's right in a technical sense, but the kind of mindset, the approach that they take, their rhetoric, and the kind of people they side with definitely puts him into a camp of Republicans who is willing to kind of challenge that establishment authority. And that's really the crux of what Ken Paxton's talked about. He said, John Cornyn's been there for too long. He's not supportive enough of Trump. And that's the wing of the party that's as Nancy said, most active in these primaries. Now, what John Cornyn's going to want to say is that it is dangerous to nominate somebody like Ken Paxton. That essentially makes it an open seat. There's been rumors that Colin Allred, who ran for Senate against Ted Cruz in the last cycle, might run again. Allred did a pretty good job outperforming Kamala Harris at the state level, and so there is probably a moment where he can build on that. But obviously, that's a longer uphill battle. But for a person like John Cornyn, he's trying to make sure that he's cemented that support. So he got the support of the National Border Patrol Council, which puts into his camp a kind of, aggressiveness on the border. That's a plus for Republican audiences. And maybe he can convince them, as we've been talking about, that Ken Paxton's too dangerous. He's too problematic to be a general election candidate.
I don't know. I think Cornyn's got years of votes in the Senate before the Trump era. So Paxton will be able to go back and research votes that make Cornyn look not so conservative.
As Brandon alluded to, Nancy, on Friday, a Travis County District Court judge awarded $6.6 million to 4 of Ken Paxton's former senior aides who said they were fired improperly after they reported their boss to the FBI. I guess remind us first, what did they report him to the FBI for?
I can't recall all the details.
All right. Well,
There's so many. There's so many
controversy.
There was so much Paxton controversy.
I can give maybe the broad brushes, and then you fill in the details here. They and 4 other former aides reported him to federal authorities in 2020 over his relations with friend and Austin real estate developer Nate
the developer,
Paul.
Right.
And they accused Paxton of abusing his office to do favors for Paul, including hiring an outside lawyer to investigate claims Paul made and providing him with confidential law enforcement documents. Paxton then fired them over it, sued him, alleging that doing so violated the Texas Whistleblower Act. This part, I'm sure you remember. How did this all play out then?
Right. Well, there were investigations into his relationship with this developer, but nothing ever came of it, though the developer himself got fined and faced some charges, but it didn't ever affect Paxton.
Well, he was impeached by the Texas House.
Well,
again.
He was impeached, but by the House,
right,
and cleared by the Senate.
Right.
So he never actually was forced out of office or anything, or even paid fines, to my knowledge.
Brandon, what did Judge Catherine Mousy say on Friday about these former staffers?
basically what she said is that they had a case, and the settlement for the infraction was going to be about $1 million-ish for each of them, sort of for legal fees and for the firing. The laws are pretty clear on this. The Attorney General's office fired these individuals within the 90-day window, and the presumption is that that firing was because of this retaliation. So in effect, they've got the state and the Attorney General here red-handed. The House still has to put this budget together and basically pay this money. Ken Paxton said he's going to appeal the ruling. Ken Paxton is very good at appealing these rulings, right? Nancy has sort of hinted at this, that a lot of the cases against him have stretched for more than a decade. So he's very comfortable letting these things play out. But definitely it's the case that the House is going to be on the hook for this money. And Ken Paxton is, as a result, going to take some arrows. I don't know how much. And obviously, too, with a primary audience that generally likes him, he's going to be in fairly good stead. But there are going to be some pushback on this, and you'll get some Republicans who will say that this is, kind of complicated situation, and maybe we should just kind of stick with the one we have.
I think you could see a Cornyn ad on the subject.
Oh yeah, that'll be the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, you could. But there are several spaces where you could go after Paxton on that sort of thing. Again, though, with this Republican primary voter, I'm not sure. They don't tend to care about these court cases, as we've seen with President Trump.
As always, I'd like to bring this stuff back to Houston, since we were talking about the potential of Cornyn versus Paxton here in the primary. Does one or the other benefit Houston generally more?
It's a good question. Obviously, John Cornyn's got a long history in the Senate, like Nancy says, and that means that there have been a bunch of incidents where he's been able to bring the bacon back home. He can brag about those things here. He was a kind of instrumental on things like the Ike Dike and some of these big infrastructure projects that the city has benefited from or will in the future benefit from. That's a kind of Kay Bailey Hutchinson argument that does persuade some members of the primary audience for Republicans. The issue, I think, will be much nastier than that, unfortunately. I think we're going to see a lot of kind of bloodshed on this. Ken Paxton has his new campaign website that just got put up, and the first reference from the Cornyn campaign was Ken Paxton is a fraud. So I think that basically gets you the kind of setup to what's going to be a pretty nasty primary fight.
We are discussing developments in politics with Party Politics co-host Brandon Rottinghouse and University of Houston political science lecturer Nancy Sims. Up next, Governor Abbott finally calls a special election in the 18th District for November. And RFK Jr. endorses the MMR vaccine. That and more as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're talking politics as we do each Wednesday. Today with Party Politics co-host Brandon Rottinghouse and his fellow UH political science lecturer Nancy Sims. Texas Governor Greg Abbott's called for a special election in the 18th District to replace late Congressman and former Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner. But he called it for November 4th and justified the additional 7-month delay by suggesting Harris County would need the time to properly prepare. The county challenges that and says it is ready to go. Waiting until November, of course, means the narrowly divided U.S. House remains down one firmly Democratic seat. The candidates for the 18th District seat are up in arms over this, but is there anything they or anyone else can do about it?
Nothing. The state law is pretty clear. The promise of litigation on this would maybe have clarified a kind of constitutional right to representation. I think that legally that would have been interesting to see, but it didn't come to that. The governor called it for kind of a long way away. The time benefits some members who might want to jump in. It is obvious that at the start, Christian Menefee raised a bunch of money and circled the kind of grouping of a bunch of really key endorsements. But you've got Amanda Edwards, who is going to need to raise a lot of money to run that. You may have some people who jump into this race like Jolanda Jones or Jarvis Johnson, and the additional time is probably going to benefit them, especially those last two who are currently working hard in Austin.
Nancy, anything you'd add to that?
Well, I do think it gives it opens the field more broadly to have more time, especially with those folks that are tied up with the legislative session and couldn't campaign in a quick turnaround race. So that is a factor. I do think it's very important for us to clarify for people that the day-to-day functions of a congressional office are still being carried out in the 18th. Sylvester Turner's staff stays in place. So while they don't have a voice on the floor of Congress, the ability to get your lost passport found, the ability to get help with Social Security, all of those things continue. And I want to be sure that residents of the 18th District know they can still call their congressional office and get taken care of. Now, they may have to call Al Green if they want to express a neighboring congressman, if they want to express their opinions of what's happening on the floor. And it's certainly the loss of a vote and lack of, what I think would have been a very powerful voice in Congress. But at the same time, the day-to-day functions of needing help from a member of Congress, letters of recommendation to the West Point Academy, those sort of things will still take place.
I'm sure, though, there are also plenty there who are saying, yeah, but you know what? Taxation without representation. What's going on here? For 8 months, I'm not going to have a vote in Congress of anybody that represents me.
Absolutely.
It's also worth noting that this election would only fill the seat temporarily until the next full cycle, which would be the following November. So this person will be the fully vested member, but it will be temporary. Whoever wins, it's probably going to have a pretty good leg up moving forward. But obviously, there could be another battle that happens on the primary when it comes to the 2026 cycle.
I mean, essentially, they'll win in November, and the filing deadline for the March primaries will be in December. So they'll have to turn around. They're going to run 3 or 4 campaigns in a short time frame.
Yep.
Fort Bend County Judge K.P. George is facing calls to step down after his arrest Friday. He's charged with money laundering, accused of illegally taking campaign money 6 years ago and tampering with a campaign finance report. But Brandon, he says that he's going to stay in office and fight, and he says this is all just a misunderstanding, a loan that he repaid himself, which isn't illegal. Is that going to wash?
We'll see. I think it is worth noting, as we've been talking about it, I've mentioned many times, that sometimes these scandals don't matter as much as we think that they do. The fact that he didn't resign when is called upon from the Democratic Party is a pretty good evidence that we see the kind of erosion of accountability when it comes to these scandals. But maybe he wants to fight this out. There's a legal case that he wants to make, and so I think that definitely he has the right to do so. But politically, it could be a bit damaging for him. If you look at Fort Bend County, it's a pretty purple county. The win rates for most down ballot people, Democrats who are generally winning, is only by about 1%. He only won by about 4%. So it's going to be a really close race. And to not have the unity of the party behind him could be a real liability.
I think he'll face a serious primary challenge as well.
In national politics, of course, we all continue to watch the political and economic impact of President Trump's wide-ranging tariffs. Aside from worries over stock market slides of recent days and what they mean for 401ks and the rest of that, what politically is at stake for the president here? It would seem a lot.
There's a lot of, I think, kind of incompleteness on his messaging. The fact that the economy is doing kind of badly right now certainly is a problem for him politically, but the fact that they're explaining it in terms of just be tough, stick it out, it's going to be worth it, is going to fall on deaf ears in the short term and maybe the long term if things don't improve. So I do think that they're really in a bind here. You're also seeing Republicans push back. You've got enough members of the Senate who are seriously considering trimming back the president's power to be able to execute these. And remember, this is a constitutional battle in the sense that the House and Senate together, collectively, Congress gives the power to the president to modify these tariffs. They can take it back if they want. And if things get worse, they might just do that.
Well, it's one thing to say the Senate might do that. It's another thing to say the House would do that.
Yeah, I think the House is going to stand behind him. And so the Senate may take action, but it may not help in the long term.
We continue to watch the number of measles cases grow across Texas. On Sunday, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. met in Gaines County with the families of 2 children who have died of measles during the recent outbreak. He then went on X to note that, quote, the most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. This came as a shock to many anti-vaxxers, as they have long seen Kennedy as their guy, as a fellow vaccine opponent. What do you make of this development?
It seems that with the outbreak ravaging Texas the way it is and spreading to other states, he really had no choice, because what it's showing is without the vaccine, what can happen. And so the sheer dominance of medical research forced him on this position. It was shocking, though, to hear him come out and say, get your vaccines for measles.
That was the kind of dominant narrative from RFK Jr. from the start. It's, I think, worth keeping in mind that the polling suggests that most people find these vaccines to be effective. Only a very small percentage, about 12% of Texans, think the vaccines are unsafe. That hasn't stopped Texas from being really emboldened by this kind of language from RFK Jr. So there's a bunch of bills that are working their way through the legislature right now to make it easier to opt out of vaccines or ensure people aren't denied medical care based upon the vaccine status, give the ledge approval basically on any new vaccines required by schools. So there is this sort of movement that's happening in Texas and other states to at least give people more authority over what is happens when it comes to vaccines. So I don't think the issue is going to go away, but I hope that measles does, because it's tragic to see this happen to kids at this level, and in an industrialized democracy like this, these sorts of things just shouldn't happen.
It's just something that had been alleviated, and now we're having to face it and deal with it, and it does have serious long-term health outcomes that can affect people for life.
Briefly, Nancy, anything else you're keeping tabs on in the Texas legislature in recent days? Anything that we should be paying close attention to?
About those school vouchers.
Yeah. Anything happening?
You know what happened is the Texas House took its sweet time going to work this year, and really, I think they're trying to do everything on their agenda in the month of April. So everyone I speak to in Austin's just completely frazzled with hearings from 8 to 10 at night. But they're going to do the budget this week, towards the end of the week, and then at the Texas House, and then they should take up vouchers after that, is my understanding, and then it'll just be open season on whatever else can squeeze through in the very limited time frame.
Mm-hmm.
You can catch Brandon Rottinghouse on Party Politics Friday night at 7:30 on News 88.7, Friday night at 8 on Houston Public Media TV8, or at your leisure on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. He is a professor of political science at the University of Houston. Nancy Sims is a political science lecturer at UH and co-hosts a podcast of her own. It's called The Default of Democracy. Brandon, Nancy, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
And just ahead, a Houstonian's place in aviation history. Stick around as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. You can probably find consequential events in commercial aviation history on most any date, but today, April 9th, is an interesting one. On this date in 1967, the prototype for the Boeing 737 took off for the first time. Just 2 years later, on the same date, the Concorde II took off on its maiden supersonic flight. Such firsts are notable for representing steps forward in technology, but the world of commercial aviation also occasionally demonstrates important societal steps forward. Take the story of Lynn Ripplemeyer of Magnolia, about 40 miles northwest of Houston. Ripplemeyer was the first woman to pilot a 747 and the first one to captain a 747 transatlantic flight. And how it happened? Well, it's quite a tale. See, back in the late 70s, she worked as a pilot for a small commuter airline that had a rule that's hard to imagine now, that 2 female pilots could never be alone on a flight. There always had to be a man on the flight crew, until one night when fate and some bad weather intervened. In 2019, Ripplemeyer told our Michael Haggerty all about it, but she started with how she went from a flight attendant in the cabin to a pilot with a seat in the cockpit.
Well, as a flight attendant, and as usually the most junior flight attendant, I ended up working where nobody else wanted to, which was taking care of the cockpit, bringing them their food and drink during the flight. And it was beautiful up there. I loved being up in the cockpit for the view. You get to see the world from 5 miles up. It's gorgeous, the coastlines and the cloud formations and sunrises and sunsets. So anyway, it was worth it being up there. And I'd ask questions about what was going on, about the navigation and all the different instruments and dials and switches to make conversation. And they explained it, and it was fascinating to me. And then finally, one of them brought me a private pilot handbook to answer more of the questions, so I could
leave us alone for 5 minutes.
Right? Yeah, go read this, kid. So I was interested, and but there weren't any female pilots, so it wasn't something I was really aspiring to. And then just the universe handed it to me, I guess. I met some people that were instructors up in Vermont. They had a little Piper Cub on floats, so I spent the summer taking flying lessons.
So you say there weren't any female pilots really at that time. What did you think you might do with this knowledge, or just, hey, I'm enjoying it, just keep going?
Yeah, that's all. It was just it was going to be a hobby, an expensive one if I kept it up. And like I said, I just thought that was it. We had to take the plane out of the water because the lake froze over. But then I met a gentleman on one of my flights that said if I wanted to keep flying, Miami had an airport during the winter on land, and I could finish up my licenses down there. So I went down and checked it out, and so I started using all my time off and paychecks to get the rest of my licenses between my flights. And that was it, between being a flight attendant and that, I thought that was about as good as it got, and I was happy with it.
Tell me how you ended up then going from the flying at that level to then flying for airlines.
Well, like I said, up until that point, I didn't think it was even an option, so I wasn't pursuing it. But then I heard that American and Frontier had both hired women pilots. So I was able to get in touch with them and say, really, is this true? Because, all the guys that I fly with tell me that's impossible. Women just don't have what it takes. You're only 5'2". You don't have the strength, the mental capacity, the emotional ability, the psychological, all the things that it takes to be a cool pilot. So are you really making it? And they said, yeah, no, you will definitely be able to be a pilot. And the main thing is the lifestyle, and you're used to it as being a flight attendant. So just get the requirements. The requirements were a college education, which I had, and a flight engineer written, which I was able to take. But you needed 1,000 hours of jet time and 1,500 hours of total. And I had no idea how I could get jet time.
If there weren't women pilots, where were you going to?
Well, and the guys got it out of the military, and the military wasn't training women to fly jets. So I was just kind of wondering, and then I was wandering through the St. Louis airport and on a 24-hour layover, and my sister lived in Carbondale, which is just south from there, and there was a little kiosk that said Air Illinois, Carbondale, 15 minutes, taking a flight. So the pilots were standing there at the counter, and I said, could I hitch a ride down there? Because usually the airlines will give reciprocal agreements and let other employees ride, and I was in my uniform. And I said, no, we can't. Our owner doesn't let us do that. The only reason we can give somebody a free ride is if you're going in for an interview. Okay, I'll interview. We don't need any more flight attendants. And then the other guy says, yeah, we just are always short on pilots. I said, okay, I'll interview as a pilot. They thought I was joking. But I said, no, really, I've got 700 hours given instruction and flying. They said, well, that's more than we had when we got hired.
You were more qualified than them.
At the time, yeah. So they picked up my bags and went out to this airplane. It was a Twin Otter. It's a 15-passenger turboprop, fixed gear. Put me in the front seat so that I could put on headsets and we could talk for the flight down to Carbondale. They wanted to know about TWA because they were interested in applying to be pilots where I was working.
They wanted to move up to the airline you worked for.
That's what it was all about, yeah. And then in talking to them, I found out that airplane was a turboprop, which meant it was a jet engine with a propeller on it and accounted for jet time. So that's how they were getting their jet time. So after we got to Carbondale, I was waiting for my sister. I asked to have an application so I could fill it out so they wouldn't be in trouble for letting me come down for an interview. And the ladies kind of said, we don't really need any more flight attendants. I said, no, I'm applying to be a pilot. Really? And she goes in the back and brings out the owner of the airline, and big burly guy with a gray flat top carrying a coffee mug with little red pigs on it that said MCP, male chauvinist pig.
Oh, wow.
He was very proud of and just thought it was hilarious and let everybody in the terminal know it was hilarious. So I was embarrassed, but they visited my sister and they gave me a ticket to get back to St. Louis. I thought that was the end of it. And then about a month later, this lady at the counter, Jennifer, calls and says, we've got a training class for you. Can you be here in 2 weeks? There's no way that guy wants women at his airline. She said, no, really, it's a class for you and another lady named Emily Jones. She's being trained as a captain, you as a first officer. So let me know if you can be here. I said, yeah, I'll be there. You know, didn't ask about salary, didn't ask about anything else. This was just amazing. And so we were in class with Emily. It was just the two of us. It was months later before we found out. We thought the reason we got hired was the owner wanted a government loan to get new airplanes, and EEOC, Equal Opportunity Commission, had gone into effect, and he would probably have a better chance at doing that if he had minorities, and that's what we were. So we were both hired, but at the end of the training week, he came in and said, okay, you two are hired. You're going to be treated just like everybody else. However, you can't fly together. It's his airline. It's his. There was no recourse at that time. You couldn't
his
argue
rule,
it.
his policy. The two women that worked for him could never fly together alone.
Right, because you have to have a man up there in case anything goes wrong. And we don't want to scare our passengers away, do we? So we just, okay, we were just glad to have the job. So for 3 months, we never flew together. There were only 20 pilots. There were only 3 planes, so it was probably a scheduling hassle. But, we were just, it was just a job. We just went to work and enjoyed it.
So then fate kind of aligns to get you both together, you and Emily, in the cockpit. What happened that day? And it was December 30th, 1977.
That's right. Dark and stormy afternoon.
All good stories start that way.
Yeah. Nobody else could get to the airport. I think it was Emily's flight, and they were able to call me, and I was able to get there. And then we realized it was just the two of us, and asked the dispatcher, we should do this. And so he called the owner, and the owner said, yeah, let him take the people to St. Louis, but keep the door closed and nobody makes any announcements. In other words, do the work, but don't let anybody know that it's the two of you up there doing it.
Don't want to scare the
Right.
passengers. Wow.
Right. But then after that, I guess since nobody died and nobody refused to get on the airplane, they let us fly together again. So probably flew together again for another dozen times before I had all the jet time I needed and started applying at the major airlines and went to TWA then with a departmental transfer, really, to be a 727 engineer. So
this flight that you guys took together and then subsequent flights, I mean, did you have any sense of that this was historic at the time, or that this was unusual? Or
no, we didn't, I don't think. We talked about that later. We were just doing our job. Well, it was unique enough that I did take some photos, which I'm really glad I have, because it was the first time I'd gotten to fly with a female, and she was a captain. These guys that told me not only could women not fly airplanes told me, and beyond that, there's no way a woman's going to ever be allowed to be a captain, because there's no man that's going to take orders from a woman, and you have to be clear on who's in charge for safety reasons. So it's you're creating an unsafe environment. So I wanted a picture of her as a captain. Yeah, women can be captains and good captains. And it was, enjoyable flying with another woman. So, but to think we were making history at the time, no, I don't think it crossed either of our minds. In fact, I didn't think about it until years later. I am a part of a female pilot organization. And we got word from some gals out in Hawaii that said, hey, we think we're just the first all-female crew flying this Twin Otter. And I went, oh, no, Emily and I did that years ago. So it was the first that I really looked into it and found out, yeah, we were the first.
So you and Emily both go separate ways. You continue to work as a pilot, eventually come to Houston. But so you lose track of each other. And the show, We'll Meet Again, comes along. How did they end up finding you and trying to track Emily down?
Well, they found me through that lady pilot. It's called ISA, International Social Affiliation for Women Airline Pilots. They contacted that organization and said, we're doing a kind of a women's right segment and looking for women that think they were part of a historic event and have lost track of each other. And so if any of your pilots fit that, and I went, yeah, that's exactly describes my situation. So I got in touch with our communication lady, and she got in touch with Blink, We'll Meet Again program, and had several phone calls to get the story and decide if that was what they wanted to pursue, and decided it was. So they came to Houston and filmed, and it turned into sort of I thought they were just going to give me a telephone number and an address and I could find her. They'd do all the work for me. But this is a reality show, and they turned into like a treasure hunt where I'd get little pieces of information all along the way without ever getting a promise that was what was at the end. It wasn't Emily. It might be that, she couldn't be found.
So they wanted to follow you in the process of trying to track her down,
right.
And you were jumping around to different places to go do some digging yourself.
Exactly.
Okay.
They had set it up to tell me where to dig. You need to go to this next undisclosed location, and you'll get your next piece of information.
Some trust involved there.
Yeah, which I'm not real good at.
But you do eventually track her down. It takes some time. So you go to be interviewed by the host, Ann Curry, in Los Angeles. Tell me what happened then.
Well, after going to the different locations of Houston, Springfield, Chicago, and then out in L.A., Ann was a lovely interviewer, asked a lot of questions about how this all came about and about my career. And then I thought Emily would be there too, but she wasn't. So we finished the interview, and I said, well, what about Emily?
Thought there were going to be this surprise reveal. Here, she's here, right?
Yeah. And but she wasn't. And they said, we still don't know. I mean, they were still keeping it hanging out there. They keep it right to the end. And then said, but you've been such a good sport about all this. We're going to take you to a nice museum tomorrow by the L.A. airport before you leave so that you can have a nice time. So I just wandered through the museum and came around the corner, and there's lights and cameras and Emily. So we did get to have a really nice surprise reunion.
So what did she remember of that historic flight and your time together?
Well, she kind of said like I did. We didn't think of it being historic at the time. We were just doing our job. And the biggest thing that I wanted her to know, I don't think she realized what an impact she had on me, on my life. Being a female captain and having made a successful career out of being a pilot up to that point. She did change careers after that, but you don't know something's possible until you see it. So she kind of literally made the impossible possible for me, which is huge. Mentors and role models are amazing people to have, and I think a lot of times the people that are those things don't realize what an impact they're having. So it was nice to be able to tell her thanks and let her know that. But yeah, she acted totally surprised that she had had that much of an impact on me.
We live in an era where that airline rule seems pretty ridiculous, yet women, of course, still face plenty of challenges in their fight for equality. What do you think your story can teach us today?
Well, that is possible. Hopefully I can be that mentor or role model, just letting women know that it's out there. You can do it. And it's an amazing career. It was just fantastic. I know one of the drawbacks a lot of women think is that you're away from home a lot, and you are or can be, but there's options. Like at Air Illinois, I was home every night, and even later, I raised 2 sons by myself, being home every night and home on weekends. I had a flight to Tegucigalpa to Honduras to do it, but it was worth it.
Lynn Rippelmeyer of Magnolia was the first woman to pilot a Boeing 747 and the first to captain a 747 transatlantic flight. Her memoir about her experiences in aviation is called Life Takes Wings, Becoming the World's First Female 747 Pilot. She spoke in 2019 with Houston Matters producer Michael Haggerty. And still to come, what a play at Houston's Ensemble Theater has to say about growing up as a black woman in the South with dreams of playing professional basketball. Stay with us as Houston Matters continues. On Tuesday's show, we heard from Cynthia Cooper, who, along with Tina Thompson and Cheryl Swoops, made up a dynamic trio of Houston Comets stars who powered the former WNBA franchise to 4 championships between 1997 and the year 2000. Before they and the Women's Pro Basketball League came along, though, girls who played the sport had limited options after high school. That is the backdrop of Flex. It's a play on stage at Houston's Ensemble Theater, which tells the story of the Lady Train basketball team in fictional Plainville, Arkansas. It's directed by Rachel Hemphill Dixon and stars Kaya Green. The pair tell Houston Matters producer Laura Walker about the play. Dixon says Flex explores what it means to be a young black woman in the South and to be part of a team.
The playwright, Candace Jones, has done a wonderful job of weaving a story about young black women coming of age with basketball. And flex, as we know, means to bend, to adapt, right? Or flex, the play, means that every player is as strong at all of the elements, and so any one of them can handle the ball. And Candace was saying black women are just that. We can handle the play no matter what you throw at us. And we also bend and adapt and make situations work, that we are survivors.
Flex is a comedy, but it also deals with some complicated issues like abortion, sexuality, sex, among others. You hold a master's of social work from the University of Houston. Go Cougs. How did your background in social work impact how you approach directing the play?
My background in social work impacts every piece of theater that I engage with, whether it's a director or an actor. And we're all of us are using it, whether we realize it or not. Using it meaning the skills that I gained from the social work world. In this piece in particular, thinking about the statistics, so that didactic information that says, 3 out of 4 women will have some sexual experience that they have to carry with them for the rest of their lives. How does that become an organic, real space for these characters, right? How does it live for you, Sydney? How does it live for you, Donna? How does it live for you, Sharice, characters in the play? So I thought a lot about, right, the statistical information that we're bringing forward. And then from a micro perspective, how do these two characters breathe together? Now, we didn't always talk about it in the process, but I would think about, like, if they're this close together, what does that mean? If they're this far apart, what does that mean? So how are they moving in space together? It is part of my social work world. So, yeah.
Among the difficult issues discussed in Flex are the issues of pregnancy and abortion. Roe v. Wade was overruled back in 2022. Though Flex is set in the 90s, is this play attempting to make a statement about right now? And if so, what is the message that it is attempting to portray?
Theater, art comes at just the right time, right? So we're just now really settling into our new political climate that says abortion really banned. I mean, Roe v. Wade went away, but now our political climate is even having a stronger message about what that means. And even though the play was written and set in 98, it's still so relevant, right? What are women going to do who have legitimate or valid in their own lives reasons to have question about birthing a baby? And where will they go? What will they do? So the relevancy of the piece is so significant. The piece also has a mention of homosexuality, and what does that look like? And with all of the legislation about trans folks and taking gender out of grant writing that's government dollars. I mean, it's happening in so many ways. So I think theater presents stories when it's time. It's kind of like our ancestral water that was is water that is water that will be. This piece is that, and most art is, right? Speaking to what's happening right now, even though it was written when it was written.
Speaking of characters in the play, Kyra, you're in Flex, and you play the California All-Star newbie to the Lady Train, Sydney Brown. What was your favorite part about the role, and how do you relate to her?
My favorite thing about Sydney is how loud she is. She's very outspoken. She knows what she wants, and she's going to go get it. She loves her team. When she was brought here, she found her tribe. And she just honestly loves the game of basketball. It's her dream. It's her life. And Sydney has a huge heart. And she loves, throughout the play, you really see that she cares for all of her teammates, especially April.
Y'all could have abandoned me, called me a traitor, but y'all been with me every step of the way, even put on pregnancy. And we would do it again.
So the lines in the play where she continuously asks April, are you okay? Do you need anything? Do you want to talk about it? And that's one thing I see that in myself. I'm a very caring person. I have a big heart. I'm a Cancer, and Cancers are very emotional.
As a former basketball player myself from the 3rd grade through my senior year of high school, I really enjoyed the play. I can relate to playing in a few championships of my own, but cannot imagine playing the game while on a theatrical stage. You and the other Lady Train members were taking real shots while delivering a great performance.
Hey, set it up! Set it up! Hey,
Did you have prior experience playing basketball, or was this something new? Was it a challenge for you to stay in character?
Oh, it was definitely new. I'm a dancer. So this whole basketball thing, try to be all swaggerlicious, that's not a word, but I made it up. But swaggerlicious, it was really hard for me. Thank God for the ensemble. They provided a coach for us. So every month we would meet with her and she would just teach us a little bit and then we would go on our own and practice. I was going in between my legs. I was practicing this dribbling. I had to enroll into YouTube University to actually learn something. But yeah, the hardest thing was because I'm a dancer, I prance. For some odd reason, when I'm running, I'm prancing. When I'm jumping, I point my toes. My legs are extended. I look like a bird. So that was really hard for me to get that elegant out of my body and get grounded into the dirt of basketball.
So since the epic battle between former Louisiana State University star Angel Reese and University of Iowa star Caitlin Clark faced off in 2023 at the NCAA championship, there has been a renewed buzz in both collegiate and women's basketball and the WNBA. Houston was home to the iconic Comets from 1997 to 2008. There was a basketball coordinator, as you said, assisting with the production of Flex. Was there any discussion about WNBA history as you prepared for the role?
Yes, there was. I didn't know anything about I'm not a basketball fan, but once I started this play, I totally became one. There was discussion about like when the WNBA was created. So it was created in 1996. And just these girls on how they had nothing. It was high school and then to college, and then you had to go play overseas. But for these girls, because the play was set in 1998, these girls were just so excited. This was their moment that they can finally play this ball professionally. Talking about that really resonated with me and helped me put that into my character of how important basketball is to them.
From him now being a new basketball fan, in your opinion, with all this buzz, do you think that Houston should bring back the Comets?
Oh, most definitely. Definitely bring back the Comets, yes.
All the girl university teams right now are eating it up. And so we have teams right here that have girls who could matriculate, women who could matriculate to a Houston team. And Houston is known for its sports, right? So put them in line. There are women out there who could help Houston be on the map.
So the play touches on Starra, who, is your nemesis in the play, trying to live up to the memory of her mother, who was an amazing basketball player in her own right, but didn't have the opportunity to play in the newly formed WNBA. What message do you think, or both of you think, that Flex is trying to portray with her journey, and do either of you relate?
Women, Black women, are not to be objectified. We are multidimensional beings who can face challenge and surpass them. And we do it in so many walks of our lives. And every girl in this play has one that they must work through. And they are not just Black girls. They're women holding down their ancestors' path, right? So I think that's part of the playwright's intended message, as well as Starra in particular. You get to choose. She was choosing a path based on her mother's influence, and then she got to pause and choose. And so for young people in particular, every choice, there's power in it.
Yes, definitely. I can relate. Being an actor, I'm so critical of myself that I just have to be good. I have to be the best. I can't fail. I need validation. I need people to think that I'm good everywhere that I go. So I definitely relate that with Starra. But towards the end of the play of Flex, she realizes that I'm good, but I only need me. It's just me. I don't need anybody else telling me that I'm good enough or I'm not good enough. I don't need anyone else's judgment but my own. I'm the only one stopping me. So I relate to that. I relate a lot with that story.
When people, are walking out of the theater, what do you both want audiences to take with them?
I would love the audience to see how far we've come as Black women from 1998 to 2025, but also to see how much further we have to fight for the next generation of Black women so they don't have to go through what we're going through now and what they went through back then with religion and sexuality and abuse and mental health and just the pursuits of self-worth.
That was some good theater at the Ensemble Theater. So that's a starting place. And it related to Flex, lift up Black girls and support them in their journey no matter what it is. And think about that baggage that you carry, those messages that you were given that may not be so true for you. And now you get to choose.
Director Rachel Hemphill-Dixon and lead actor Kaya Green there talking with Houston Matters producer Laura Walker about Flex. The play is on stage at Houston's Ensemble Theater through Sunday. And that'll do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, also Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, Mincho Jacob, and Laura Walker. Jared Carroll's our technical director. On tomorrow's show, how economic and cultural shifts are impacting Houston area coffee shops. Also, members of the group WindSync discuss their on-stage, off-stage chamber music festival featuring contemporary solo works and a performance with the Houston Youth Symphony's Coda music program. I'm Craig Cohen. Join us tomorrow for those and other Houston Matters.